And he said, I'm going to make more money by making science fiction toys. I'm going to make more money than even The Godfather by making science fiction toys. And he hated directing, George did, because he got sick all the time. He had diabetes, and he just wasn't very sturdy. And he got sick. And he always would talk, he would say, porno, that's the answer. He says, it's a warm room. You know, if you don't get the right location, you go get another. I mean, people really don't care what room, as long as it's a pretty nice room. So if he hadn't done Star Wars or American Graffiti, he would probably own this huge porno network today. You know, he'd probably be even richer than he is.
Hey, JP. Is that a gun? Did you bring a gun to a podcast?
That's right, Ron.
Why?
Because John Milius did it. It's supposed to be a power move.
Oh, I guess it's your podcast now then.
All right. I want gold. I want guns and women. Well, scratch women. I'm married, actually.
John Milius was married too, I think.
Really?
I think so.
Huh.
Hey, folks.
Hi.
We are
Delusions of Granular. Hey.
I'm Ron.
I'm JP.
And today we're going to be talking about something a little bit more granular than we usually talk about. We're going to be talking about John Milius.
Right. Yes. Famed writer and director.
Yeah.
Of
from
80s, 70s Hollywood.
Yeah. Kind of a classmate of George Lucas in his USC days.
That's right. Yeah, he palled around with George and Coppola and Spielberg.
That's right. Yeah. So we'll get to him in a minute, but we wanted to let you know how you guys can kind of talk to us. Like we said, we are Delusions of Granular. You can find us at Delusions of Granular. That's GRANULAR.com.
That's right. And don't forget to say hey to us over at Facebook, facebook.com/SWDog, or say hi on Twitter at SWDog77.
That's right. Or you can call us at 651-337-9364. That's 651-33-SWDog. Call us, leave a message, and if we like what we hear, we'll put it on the air.
And if you're old-fashioned, you can always just send us an electronic letter via email at swdog77@gmail.com.
Wow, electronic letter. It sounds so old-fashioned already.
I know, right? Did you know that what is it? Is it stun guns? Or is it one of those guns that they use to that hits you with like a ray that paralyzes you?
Yeah.
Like cops use?
Yeah.
It's
Taser.
Taser, that's right, yeah. That's based off of, it stands for Thomas A. Swift's electronic rifle.
Really?
Yeah, it's a Tom Swift, the old-timey science fiction character
That's
reference.
Funny.
Yeah, isn't it? So there you go, right at the top of the show, right in the middle of the notes. I dropped some knowledge.
That's right. All right, folks, one more thing. Two more things. You can always find us on iTunes. Just do a search for Delusions of Granular. We should pop up. You can subscribe to us there or on Stitcher. And if you like what you hear, recommend us to your friends.
Yeah, go old school.
Yeah.
Just talk to your friend.
That's right. If you got somebody who's interested in Star Wars as much as you are and they like to listen to podcasts whenever.
Or if you're, maybe you're on a new media. Maybe you're on Snapchat. Maybe when you're sending out your dick pics, you can write SW Dog on it.
That's right. There you go. We're not proud.
Yeah, we'll take the hits however we get them. That's how Snapchat works, right, Ron? Is that what it's for?
I wouldn't know. I'm married.
Okay, right.
I have been noticing that a lot of our listeners, I think, are overnight listeners. So maybe we need to be using our overnight DJ voices.
Oh, the quiet storm.
That's right.
I hear you.
In the midnight hour.
Oh, yeah. Me and Rondo Calrissian.
But on a serious note, folks, we're recording this just days after some sad news hit the sci-fi world.
Oh, yeah. And the world at large.
That's right.
Yeah.
We lost a huge icon last week. Leonard Nimoy passed away.
Yep. Author of I Am Not Spock and I Am Spock.
Yeah. That's nice, yeah.
Yeah.
He really kind of came to terms with the character in between a few decades.
Really grappled with it. Yeah, I'm a pretty big Star Trek fan. I would label myself as a Trekkie.
I am not, but when I found out that he passed away, I was sad. It took me back.
You know, he really did become a face of the cultural landscape. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, with him gone, I mean, I think everyone knows what Spock is. Everyone knows what, live long and prosper, a little hand sign.
That's right.
Yeah. It's a sad day. I am a little ashamed. When I first read the news, my immediate thought was, thank God it wasn't Shatner.
I did not think that. I did. I wanted to post some things on our Facebook page and on Twitter and that. And
mm-hmm.
I wanted to.
So that was very respectful.
Yeah, I wanted to be respectful about it because I am not a Star Trek fan. Again, I respect Spock, the character. I respect Leonard Nimoy and his work.
Yeah.
I just never got into the show. But I wanted to post something as a Star Wars fan. Be like,
Certainly.
hey, doesn't matter if you're a Star Wars fan or a Star Trek fan. We lost an icon, and
and he
somebody who should be remembered and will be remembered.
Totally. And outside of, if you want to go outside of Star Trek, he did do some great work on the old Mission Impossible series. If you ever indulge yourself in that.
That's right.
And my favorite iteration of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978 version with Donald Sutherland.
Nice.
Yes, he did a great job as a former hippie turned yuppie.
Great.
And
and
he directed my favorite Star Trek motion picture, Star Trek 4.
The one with the whales.
That's right, The Voyage Home.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
With the incredibly strange and artistic version of time travel.
Oh, yeah, right. You did show me a YouTube video of that. That's the Star Trek movie that I like to call Star Trek. The one my mom even likes.
It's really, I don't know, it's a blast. I think it's a very fun little movie.
Yeah.
Double dumbass on you. So.
Right. And he was, you know what? He was a photographer.
Oh, that's right. Tasteful photography.
He made music.
Jewish women.
Yeah, he made music. He was quite the Renaissance man.
Truly.
Yeah. So, Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, live long and prosper.
Well, Ron, he's dead.
Oh well.
He's dead.
He did live. He lived long and prospered.
He did. He prospered. He lived long.
That's right.
Way to go.
There.
Hey.
All right.
On that note.
Quick other homework. I know you wanted to pull up an email. While you're pulling up that email, let me. I wanted to talk again about the THX 1138. A couple things we missed as we were talking about it last week.
Yes.
Wanted to just kind of cover our asses on all this stuff. So, 3 things. We talked last week about how the word Wookiee appears or shows up in the chatter.
Was I incorrect on this one?
No. Wookiee definitely does appear in the chatter.
Oh, thank
right?
God. Thank Christ, I lose so much sleep over this shit.
But it wasn't just a random word that they threw out.
Oh.
It was actually a man's name.
Really?
Yeah, 2 guys showed up to kind of record some of the chatter for George Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
A man by the name of Terry McGovern, who is a local DJ out in California, also an actor. And his friend Bill Wookiee showed up. And they recorded some lines for the movie, and that's, all of a sudden Wookiee is in the movie, and George Lucas jotted it down in his notes, and, a few years later...
Wookiee, that's a good name.
That's right. Right. The other one, this is a little bit more well-known, but I wanted to kind of throw it out there so we, didn't miss it. But the term R2-D2, or the name R2-D2, did come from TH1138. It's a term that was used while they were editing the movie. Walter Murch and George Lucas kind of sitting there with all the all the actual film. This was back in the day when they were editing with real film. And Walter Murch turns to George Lucas and he's like, hey, I need R2-D2, which stood for Real 2, Dialogue 2.
Oh,
right? So again, George Lucas is like, hey, I like the sound of that.
R2-D2. R2-D2.
I'm going to write that down.
I'm going to write down on a little pad.
Finally, the beginning of TH-1138 starts with a Buck Rogers trailer from the serial.
That's right, yes.
From the 1939 serial. Pay attention to when you're actually kind of put that on, because George Lucas actually edited the sound on that. Buck Rogers, the original series, kind of starts out and it says, Buck Rogers in the 25th century, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, George Lucas edited that and changed it to where he actually says Buck Rogers in the 20th century.
For 20th Century Fox.
Well, because he was kind of, THX was kind of his take on Buck Rogers at that time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it wasn't a futuristic movie. It's like the future is now.
Right.
So
I thought it was like a 20th Century Fox. For
no,
Star
because
Wars.
Warner Brothers put it out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be damned.
That's right.
Look at that. Yeah. That seems very much from the kind of mind that, like when they did Indiana Jones and it does the Paramount logo.
That's right. Yeah.
Transferring to the mountain. You know?
Yeah.
The same kind of humor.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Well, they're into it. Does anyone have a point of reference for 20th century anymore? Because like when I was like, I might have caught that when I was a kid, but only because my point of reference would have been Daffy Duck in the 25th and a half century.
I think it was.
I don't think anyone knows what that is anymore.
Well, here's the thing: I think you're wrong about that. I think it was Duck Dodgers in the 23rd and a third.
Something. I don't know. It was something. It was
because
like
I got confused. I was looking this up. I wanted to make sure I got my fact right about this Buck Rogers thing.
Yeah.
Right. And
they had a spin-off cartoon of it too.
Yeah.
In the recent years.
But I was looking into it. I was like, oh, it was Buck Rogers in the 23rd century. Somehow I had 23 stuck in my head.
Huh.
Right. And I kept looking and it didn't come up. It kept coming up 25th century, and it kept coming up with the 80s, the show with Bill Gerard and what's her name?
Yes.
Right. The sexy TV show. Right. And I'm like, okay, well maybe back in 1939 they were actually, it was the 23rd century, and then they updated it to the 25th century in the 80s. Right. But no, it's always been the 25th century, and I think the Duck Dodgers is where the 23rd and a third century came in.
Now, I think you're confusing it with the Naked Gun 33 and a third. It might be 23.
It's possible. I thought it was...
If only we had some kind of machine that could tell us this.
We can look things up on.
Well, it'll be a fun little trivia game. We'll give the answer at the end of the episode.
Sure. If we remember.
If we remember.
We're not too drunk. All right. We have an email.
That's right, we do. From a good friend of the show, PJ, and a friend from my hometown, PJ. So, the Bizarro JP. But PJ wrote us a nice, well-thought-out long letter here. And it's letter. It's like a handwritten
snail mail?
Yeah. No, it's a nice long email here about giving us some praise for the Kevin Smith episode. Thank you. We were a little hesitant doing that. It was very geeky. So
it was a little, we were a little fanboyish.
We were a little out of our comfort zone, but we were like, let's just let the flag fly.
That's
so
right.
I'm glad someone appreciated that. Also, he brings up some EU things, and says he's never really ventured into the EU, hasn't even really done the Clone Wars animated series or anything, but he's basically just a straight-up six-filmer guy. And but he's very interested in this kind of like what-if scenarios, and he's wondering like something where I think he's looking for something where it'd be an easy in and out, for like give me a quick hit of like what it would be like if the droids, R2 and C-3PO retained their memories and had some, it said, were a little more hostile and explored a little bit more of their technological programming and stuff.
Okay.
Now, first off, Pete, I believe there are actually some, there's a series that Dark Horse put out called Star Wars Galaxies. Is that right, Ron?
There are Star Wars...
Infinities.
Yeah.
There was a whole series put out, and it was nothing but...
what-if scenarios.
What-if scenarios.
Yeah, it's basically telling the story.
I believe even like creators like Garth Ennis, like they got some big names on that series. It was like kind of an anthology type thing.
Yeah, it was basically the original 3 movies retold as what ifs, and it's like big things happen. Like Luke dies.
Yeah,
At battling in the Battle of Yavin, Luke dies.
Right.
And like Han thinks he's the one that has to go and learn from Yoda the Force, and he's wrong and ends up being like it's crazy, like what if scenarios.
And if I recall, if I'm thinking of the right thing, there's also like some shorter stories. Like I remember one in specific, and I think this is the same series, where it was like, what if Han Solo hadn't won the Millennium Falcon, hadn't won that hand of
Sabak.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So
it's possible. I would say, I mean, PJ, you should really dive into the EU now Legends.
Yeah,
like dive in anywhere because it's good fun.
Yeah,
like I'm going back and just diving into stuff, and it's great because it's like none of it matters, but they're just like fun little stories, and they took it pretty far, and they took it in a lot of different directions, and probably took it too far at a certain point, but there's a lot of great stuff there. And if you're not a novel reader, there's a lot of great comic books there. Just go to your local comic book store, and they have a bunch of Star Wars omnibuses, omnibuy. They're probably like 400, 500 pages. They probably have, kind of a few complete runs in there. And they're kind of broken up by topic, so you can pick up an entire book that's just droids. You can pick up another book that's just like the Sith. You can pick up another one that's the Tales of the Jedi. Like it's
Old Republic.
Yeah,
whole 9 yards.
Can pick up, and there's like 30 of these omnibuses out there.
Oh yeah,
so like
hot sellers.
There's plenty of things that you can kind of jump into. That'll give you, the entire EU now is a what if scenario.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. Yeah, yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah. And this is kind of more specific to some of your ideas here about some things that could happen to droids, etc.
Yeah.
There's also a pretty decent 6-issue mini I can direct you towards the Dark Horse put out in the 90s called Droids.
Yeah.
And that dealt pretty much exactly with what you're talking about like what if they remembered their programming, what if they went rogue. There's a cool cover image of
C-3PO with a gun.
Yeah, an X on his head. It's badass.
There's a lot of things happen in the EU that I'm kind of grateful it's erased. Like C-3PO pilots the Millennium Falcon more often than you would think. in the EU.
It's funny just in transitioning out, once again, thanks again for writing in, PJ, and we encourage other listeners to join the conversation as well.
Yeah.
I understand PJ's having a little bit of a medical problem right now, so hey, best wishes to you, buddy. Hope you get well soon.
Absolutely.
But in terms of reboots and stuff, like, Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, New 52, comics, they're rebooting the new Spider-Man franchise, all this stuff. It's always all this negativity, but sometimes it's like, I'm kind of glad some of it's gone. Like some of the rough stuff is now cleared away.
Sure. Only to bring in more rough stuff, but reboots.
That's
again.
right.
Yeah,
and I think we'll probably cover that when we have our Rebels episode here.
That's
in 2 weeks.
That's right. All right. Shall we?
Yeah.
Shall we move into our topic du jour?
Yes, I think I'm ready.
All right. Folks, we wanted to talk about John Milius today. John Milius is a name that
will go down in infamy.
Well, he's a name that isn't as recognized as a Spielberg, as a Lucas, as a Francis Ford Coppola, as a Scorsese.
Sure.
But he's from that era. He's from that ilk.
Yeah, from that crew.
He's from that crew. And we're going to try to tell you his story tonight because he's very much connected to George Lucas in the early days.
Yeah.
And he's somebody that you probably are familiar with his work, even though you may not know the man himself.
And Yeah, and while I don't, I don't know if we'll actually tell his story so much.
Sure.
I think there's a fantastic documentary on Netflix right now called Milius.
Milius, yeah.
That I would direct everyone towards. But we're just going to kind of have a conversation about this guy and how he's touched all our lives.
Sure. The key here, if you don't know who we're talking about,
right.
and you're just about ready to turn it off right now and be like, yeah, this one's not for us.
Yeah, these guys
today,
used to be cool
right?
when they talk about Star Wars.
That's right. John Milius is actually been personified in a fairly recent movie,
Okay.
The Big Lebowski.
Yep.
Kind of a fan favorite, cult favorite. I know it's a favorite of mine.
Mm-hmm.
John Goodman character who played Walter Sobchak in the movie.
Yep.
He basically is playing John Milius.
Yeah, pretty
right?
much.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost a dead-on ringer for...
Over the top, temperamental, conservative.
Yeah. Conservative, gun-toting...
Yeah, in public.
Yeah. He not only, like, personifies him, he gets the look of John Milius down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sunglasses, beard... Kind
Weird,
of
like,
flat top haircut.
Yeah, kind of faux paramilitary vest.
Big guy. Yeah. Yeah. So that's who we're talking about, basically. This guy is he was a writer and a director.
Mm-hmm.
Went to school with George Lucas.
That's right.
Became like kind of a big brother to George Lucas. I imagine how this went down is George Lucas, you know, kind of a scrawny guy back in the day.
Right.
Probably picked on a little bit.
He's very much portrayed as the big brother for George Lucas, which was
Yeah.
what kind of got us to do this episode.
Yeah, John Milius, you know, was kind of always a large, gregarious guy.
Gregarious is the word.
Yeah, and you know, it kind of befriended George Lucas, and you know, kind of a bodyguard, sort of. You know, kept kids from bullying old George.
Well, and teachers too.
That's
There's
right.
a story of him popping some teacher in the face.
Yeah, yeah.
for giving George too much crap. Yeah, the two of them collaborated together on a short animated film called Mercio, I'm bored.
Okay.
I'm so bored.
I'm so bored.
Yeah, and I haven't gotten the chance to see it yet. It looks like kind of a American Graffiti-esque, you know, kind of flashback to kind of bikers and that sort of thing. Okay. I have no idea what it actually is.
All right.
I know George Lucas edited it, and Milius wrote and directed and animated it. Milius was offered animation work and was like, no, it's not for me. I can't imagine doing cell after cell for the rest of my life.
Sure.
Now, before we
This
go much
is
further...
this is like the late 60s that this is going on. Mid to late 60s.
Yeah, I suppose, when they're at USC.
USC. To kind of give people kind of a little bit of background of what was going on back then, there was only 3 schools that actually offered filmmaking as a degree. You know, this was early days. Like, you didn't go to college to take up filmmaking if you expected to actually get a career in filmmaking.
This is an era where a lot of people probably didn't really know what a director was.
Right, and the big studios were still kind of, you know, they ran the game. You know, they were still, you know, it was like, if you were going to get into Hollywood, and you basically had to figure out how to get into a big studio, or else you weren't going to make it anywhere.
Totally.
Right? The big studios were putting out large, big budget movies, you know, that were, at this point, pretty bland.
Right.
You know, it was kind of the dying days of the big studio, and timing worked out that, you know, George Lucas and this crew ends up going to film school and ended up getting plucked out of film school to make movies.
Yeah, and it's kind of a intertwined web of talented people being in the right place at the right time, and a lot of connections to one guy in particular, Francis Ford Coppola.
He didn't even go to USC. He went to UCLA.
Right.
Right. That was the other films. That was the other school that offered a film program, and the other one was out in New York.
UCLA.
Yeah. So those were the 3 schools, and George Lucas and Milius went to USC.
Right. And now, before we go much further, maybe we should just couch this a little bit in terms of the reason we're doing this is because to understand the man who made the movies, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe, we haven't completely thought this through, but like maybe this is a series of podcast episodes that we do where it's like the friends of George Lucas, the director friends, and we kind of cover off on that 70s crew.
Right.
Because, obviously Francis Ford Coppola is a big key player, Steven Spielberg. As we mentioned in last week's episode, those are the big names. There's a lot of smaller players like a Walter Murch, William Hike.
Right.
A
Right.
lot of these other people that aren't as well known, they aren't the big marquee names, but they're still like a huge, huge part of that era. And Milius is actually he's contributed a lot to the zeitgeist that we like to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
That you might not be aware of.
And let's just tease out a few of those things.
Yeah.
Some of the more iconic Dirty Harry lines.
So Milius, well, let's say this. George Lucas in school was primarily known as being an editor, before, none of these guys were directors. They kind of had their fortes in college.
Yeah.
Right? George Lucas was kind of the editor. He definitely liked to work in the editing room and dark room. Right.
Yeah.
John Milius.
Watching.
John Milius is a storyteller.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So he definitely knows how to tell a story. He's a great writer. How great of a writer is he? Well, here's a few lines that George Milius. These are from George Milius's mind. You may have heard of some of these. He came up with, "Do you feel lucky, punk? Do ya? Go ahead, make my day." I mean, who hasn't heard that line? Dirty Harry?
Yeah,
Come on.
yeah.
Right? I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Right? From Apocalypse Now.
Oh, yeah, of course.
He wrote that, right?
Charlie Don't Surf.
Also from Apocalypse Now.
Yeah,
right?
same thing, yeah.
A little bit more obscure, but Wolverines!
I think if you're especially of a specific era, you know that.
Yeah,
one.
1984 Red Dawn came out, and that's a huge Milius picture that he wrote and directed. We will get to that a little bit later. But these are iconic lines. They've become part of the fabric of pop culture. I mean, you can't really go anywhere without talk to somebody and be like, "Go ahead, make my day." That's synonymous with just like pop culture,
Yeah. Oh,
that's
yeah.
pop culture 101,
That's Leonard
right?
Nimoy. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Right.
And for me, the big touchstone will always be the Quint's speech in the Jaws.
That's right. He wrote
The Jaws.
the Jaws. He wrote Quint's speech about the Indianapolis that went down in.
Now, you can't quite give him full writing credit on that, because supposedly he wrote like 3 pages, and...
No. The original writer wrote... it was about 3/4 of a page, right? And Spielberg calls Milius up, who, was kind of the go-to writer at this time.
Yep.
Right?
I think he's actually had a long career off the books as a script doctor, too.
Yeah.
In the post years.
Well, the original Dirty Harry, he's not credited as being a writer.
Right.
He just comes in and, pumps up the script. Right? But the story goes with Jaws was Spielberg wanted this monologue that Quint does about the Indianapolis to kind of be a real epic scene.
Yeah.
Right? And the original writer, who I don't have his name off the top of my head...
Walter Murch.
It was not. We're just blaming Walter Murch for everything.
I'm just trying to really pump up Walter Murch now.
William Hike. He wrote like a paragraph. And Spielberg's like, I'm gonna call John Milius and see if he can come up with anything more. Right?
Yeah, pep it up.
John Milius, over the phone, dictates a 10-page script of this speech to Spielberg. And I'm sure Spielberg is on the other end, like jotting this down.
Yeah,
right?
and this is where the story gets kind of the collaborative nature of film, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's telling it on the phone, based off of a script that another guy did, and he's jotting it down. And then Shaw, the actor who played Quint,
Yeah.
supposedly part drunk, then powers it down further in the actual scene,
Right.
kind of adding his own flavor to things.
Right.
So it becomes a whole. So who knows what was what was originally spoken on the phone, but apparently it made it through.
So, and this collaborative nature will kind of run through this episode of Delusions of Granular, because we'll talk about the making of Apocalypse Now, and how collaborative that really was, because that was not made by one person, and who was going to make Apocalypse Now kind of switched hands before the movie was actually being made. Mm-hmm. So we'll get to there, but
I think we're bearing the lead here. I mean, if you're going to say what's the John Milius masterpiece, I think you're going to have to say it's Conan the Barbarian.
he did make Conan the Barbarian.
And we will get to that point,
Yes.
but that's the guy we're talking about tonight.
So the big movies that Milius is kind of responsible for: Apocalypse Now, Conan the Barbarian, and I would say Red Dawn is kind of the one that kind of brought him down.
Well, I'm going to disagree when we get to that point, but we'll see.
We'll get there.
So, anyhow, flashback to the 60s again.
Yes.
You know, it had to have that Forrest Gump transfer.
Oh, right.
You know?
That was a little Credence.
Yeah, that was. Thanks, that was CCR, yeah. Okay, so here he is, back at USC. Mm-hmm. Him and Lucas, they've actually won some film awards for their short film.
That's right. Lucas won his short THX,
as we discussed last. And the work they did together.
Yes.
And meanwhile, Lucas has gone off to work with his big buddy Francis Ford Coppola on The Rain People, like we talked about last week.
That's right. And
he comes back and introduces him to this other guy, Milius.
Right. And throughout all of this, like, Vietnam's going on. Okay? Vietnam's going on, which is a key factor here, okay? People were getting drafted. They were getting enlisted into the war.
Right.
You know, right? And
I think they were expecting to go.
Milius always assumed that he was going to have a career in the military and not live long. You know, like, that was just like, well, I'm gonna go over fight in Vietnam and die. That was basically his outlook.
Right.
Right. But Lucas, he gets enlisted, doesn't get accepted. Why? Because he has diabetes. Right. Finds out he has diabetes. Right. Milius gets enlisted. Finds out, or he kind of knew this, but has asthma. Right. It's not going to. It doesn't get accepted.
Good for him.
Right. So, but Milius is like, the guy comes out and he's like, I always thought I was going to be a general, and I'm not a general. So now what am I going to do? I guess I'll try to become a director. Right.
Right. And now this is the point where, and I'm going to keep kind of painting this throughout the episode, is that, like, there is a great story about who John Milius is, but it's as told by John Milius.
Well, true.
You know what I mean?
And the guy is
a storyteller. Who is a great storyteller.
Yeah.
I think Spielberg in that documentary, which I can't recommend enough, it also has a connection to Kevin Smith. That is a joint by his buddy Scotty Moe.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Mosier was one of the producers.
Scott Mosier is, he's Kevin Smith's producer.
Mm-hmm.
Produced Clerks.
Yep.
He produced this documentary.
Yeah. That's one thing Spielberg says. He describes him as a raconteur, and I think that's a perfect name for John Milius.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Milius is kind of bumping around Hollywood, trying to figure out what he's going to do. Kind of like we said earlier, the studios are kind of plucking these guys out from film school, because again, Easy Rider hit it big. Mm-hmm. So they're like, oh, the younger generation, that's where we need to go. We need to find these guys. So they get kind of some of the early on work of Milius is really just screenwriting.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
A couple of films that he worked on. The Devil's Eight, basically a knockoff of the Dirty Dozen, right?
Yep.
It's so much a knockoff, they didn't have enough budget for a dozen guys, so hence the 8.
Yeah, sure.
Right? But that was the time.
Now getting referenced in the Quentin Tarantino movie, Hateful Eight.
That's right. Yeah. He worked on the screenplay for Evil Knievel. Evil Knievel was the Daredevil in the 70s.
And now these are both movies I haven't seen, but after having read up on this guy for the research for this podcast, I'm going to go back and watch this whole filmography.
Sure.
Like, Evil Knievel most particularly sounds very interesting.
And one of the reasons why we haven't really watched these movies, like, for me, like, JP, this was before you were born. These movies didn't come out until, they came out, we're talking 69, 71 here.
Oh, yeah.
Right? This is right when I was being born.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Like, so, like, Evil Knievel comes out in 1971, starring George Hamilton. George Hamilton, if you don't know, is he's basically an actor who's known for his suntan. Like, he's always...
he's that guy.
Yeah, he's always just working on the tan,
Yeah, he looks like...
Skin
kind of
cancer be damned. I'm working on my tan.
Looks like a gross Cary. What's his name? Cary Grant.
Yeah,
kind of like a gross Miami Vice version of Cary Grant.
Yeah, I mean, this is the 70s, so, I mean, he's old and wrinkly or dead right now, but, like, back then, he was,
He's always kind of gross, though.
Well, yeah, and, like, I think there was even a movie in, like, the 80s that was, like, he played Dracula, like, in a comedy, and it was so ridiculous because Dracula, like, with a tan.
Yeah.
Like, how's that work?
Nice. Right? Broke the movie for you. I don't believe in this film anymore. There's no truth in there.
But, so, George Hamilton, he had this screenplay written by another guy and, again, calls on John Milius to kind of bump it up, And John Milius comes over to George Hamilton's house, reads the script, throws it in his pool, and beats it with an oar. And George Hamilton is like, at that point I knew that John Milius was going to rewrite my script. Because your previous script is now waterlogged in the bottom of your pool. And that's kind of how Milius was.
Yeah.
Right?
He's definitely a... it's one of those... Have you ever met someone like this? Who's just very... What would you call that? Type A personality, I guess?
Yeah, an alpha dog.
Yeah,
totally.
Big time.
Yeah.
Where it's like the attention's on them, they're focused, they're doing the thing, and...
Yeah.
And kind of acting in the moment. Making moments more than, like, thinking ahead, I feel.
Sure, and the documentary about Milius, they kind of reference this a little bit more than we are here, but like that was the appeal of him. Like, people were hiring him because of who he was. Like, he was that guy. Like, they would put up with whatever bullshit because the guy delivered.
Totally.
So the guy is beating a script in a pool with an oar, and George Hamilton is just like, whatever, the guy's good. I'll deal with it.
This crazy personality, you get like a fun story of like, I had Milius in here. Do you know what he did? He beat a script with an oar, and you get a kick-ass script. And like, so people are willing to take a little bit of bullshit if you deliver the goods.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the script for the original Dirty Harry rolls along. Okay.
Yep.
Dirty Harry was a Frank Sinatra vehicle.
I know it's impossible to separate what's his name from Dirty Harry.
Clint Eastwood. Yeah.
But I would be really interested to see what Frank Sinatra... Because keep in mind, Dirty Harry comes out after Death Wish, I believe. Like by a year or two.
Possibly.
Like, I would love to see what the inverted version of Death Wish is with Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra from the 70s, especially.
Oh, yeah.
Because you got to keep in mind, Frank Sinatra was actually living a life outside of the law at this point. Like,
right.
Beating the fuck out of people in restaurants and then just throwing money at them. Yeah. So I would love to see that version, too.
Yeah.
That said, you can't fault Dirty Harry. I mean, Christ.
No, right. No.
Okay.
Right.
Callahan.
Right. So, another familiar name pops up around Dirty Harry that we've talked about in the past, Irvin Kershner.
Ah, yes.
He was attached to the movie for a while to direct it.
Interesting.
Right?
Weird.
So, Irvin Kershner was going to direct Dirty Harry with Frank Sinatra. Like,
God,
what an alternate reality that is.
If only we could see that movie. You
Yeah,
know?
right? And Milius was brought on to kind of work on the script when he thought that Sinatra was attached.
Man, Sinatra would have been a good fucking cop, man.
Yeah, right?
Good, like, loose cop.
Yeah. Although, I've read books on Sinatra, and, like, I don't think we would have got the nuanced character that we got with Clint.
Well,
Sinatra, one take and we're done.
True, but I don't know. He also delivered on some stuff. I mean, ever watch Suddenly? He's pretty good in that. You know? I mean, I have a history of Sinatra. I'm a fan. I enjoy the
who's
films.
not? Who's not?
So, yeah.
So, like I said, Milius was not credited with working on the screenplay for Dirty Harry, but this was a key thing happens while he worked on Dirty Harry.
Yes.
Payment for working on Dirty Harry prior to actually writing anything.
Mm-hmm.
He wants a gun. I want a gun. I can't write this movie unless I have a gun. And the studio execs, because this is the crazy ass 70s, they're like, all right, we'll get him a gun. Send him a gun. He's like, oh, no. The gun, if you send it to me, it's going to take a couple weeks. I'm not going to work on the movie until I get the gun. So he's like, all right, I guess we'll hand deliver the gun to you. And he's like, all right, but just so you know, the day I get the gun, no work's going to be done on the screenplay because I'm going to sit here and look at the gun all day. Like, that's what he says to the studio execs. Like, I'm just going to sit here and stare at this gun because I love guns.
You know, my dad's a gun nut. He's got a fairly sizable collection of guns.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing with these guys. Like, they really do. I mean, there's something about the mechanical precision of it. Like, I can appreciate it to a certain degree.
It's a machine.
Yeah. And it's there's a whole, like, philosophy behind it. I don't...
Right.
I can't connect with it. I don't know.
I can't either.
Yeah,
but
I know the type.
Yeah. And again, it refers back to John Goodman in The Big Lebowski.
Yeah, totally.
You know? Right? But apparently the gun that Milius owned was actually the gun from the movie.
Oh, cool.
Right?
The Big 45?
Colt 45 or whatever the hell it was.
Colt 45?
I don't know. Right?
40 liter of...
Yeah. But he ended up, so he owned the gun for a while, and then he ended up trading it away. Like, he actually had Dirty Harry's gun and, got rid of it.
Yeah.
All right, so then he goes on to write some more screenplays. Jeremiah Johnson with Robert Redford.
Yeah, that's an interesting film, too.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know much about it.
In case you're not getting the point, Evel Knievel, Dirty Harry, Jeremiah Johnson, this is a very male-oriented...
Well, yeah, let me pull up the quote, actually from the documentary. But it's from Sam Elliott, also from The Big Lebowski.
That's right.
All right. Sam Elliott, kind of a man's man, right? Always played the kind of the,
Well, I don't know what you're...
macho cowboy kind of guy, right? He has a
got
quote.
any sarsaparilla?
Yeah, he has a quote in the Milius documentary, and not to rely on the documentary for the entire podcast, but this quote was too good to not pull directly from the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Sam Elliott, in describing John Milius, he doesn't write for pussies and he doesn't write for women. He writes for men because he's a man.
Because he's a man.
And that, as crude as that is John Milius to a T.
Yeah.
Right? Again, Dirty Harry, Jeremiah Johnson. He goes and writes The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, starring Paul Newman. But actually, Milius wanted Lee Marvin for the part because Paul Newman wasn't manly enough, but Paul Newman was more interested in the part.
Is that the movie about like the judge that's kind of like a traveling judge?
I believe so. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Kind of.
I didn't know he had anything to do with that movie.
Yeah. Yeah. He
Cool
wrote
movie.
it. He wrote it.
Badass.
Right, but he didn't. He wasn't happy with it.
I can't believe I missed it in the notes.
He wasn't happy with it.
Because Paul Newman was too.
He wasn't the right. He wasn't the right. He was not cast right for it. It was more of a Lee Marvin role. Lee Marvin is kind of an actor. Is again the man's man.
Totally.
Not that Paul Newman isn't a man's man, but he's more of the pretty boy at this point in Hollywood.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
This is post Cool Hand Luke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Post Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid too.
Oh, okay. See, that's never my point of reference for him. It'll always be Cool Hand Luke.
Cool Hand Luke, really? That's funny because Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is not only my point of reference for Paul Newman, but also the death of the studio system.
Really?
Because it came out in '69, and I was like, that was the last great studio movie before the auteurs took over.
That's possible. Yeah. I mean, I think they're. Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. It's that, and what's the other big Western? The last great Western with. It's another like numbers thing. Magnificent Seven.
Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So both those have like echoes of the new Hollywood thing happening.
Sure.
Before they happen.
Sure.
But,
I'm glad you bring up the Magnificent Seven because John Milius also responsible for.
no way. Go on.
For turning George Lucas onto Kurosawa.
Right? Yes.
John Milius, he gets rejected from the service, doesn't know what the hell he's going to do with his life, bumming around Hollywood, so he goes and he's just kind of hanging out at matinees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're playing Kurosawa movies, right? And he goes to the movies, sees Kurosawa, and he's like, this is what I want to do, right? Like he sees this, the strong
Toshiro Mifune.
Yeah, the strong protagonist, quiet, long, wide shots.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I could do this, right?
Totally.
And at that time, when people saw, like, when these film students saw something they liked, they dragged all their friends who were also film students to the movies, right? And he's like, oh, I saw this, you got to see this, right?
Yeah.
So he drags Lucas to see these Kurosawa movies, right?
And of course,
Lucas probably would not have caught on to Kurosawa if it wasn't for Milius.
And Milius wasn't, according to him at least, wasn't actually thinking about becoming a director. He always imagined himself as more of a writer and stuff. But
yeah.
But yeah, isn't that interesting? Just how times have changed. It's like it's one of those things where it's like I don't know that it's any better or worse, but like you're a film student now, and it's like, oh man, like, to be very unhip, but it's like you have to see this thing on Netflix. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the romanticism is gone.
Yeah, of like having to call your friend. He might not be there to answer the phone, but you have to somehow get in contact with him with no email or
send him a Snapchat, a dick pic.
Yeah. It's like it's not like when we're trying to start the podcast. I send you a dick pic and we didn't start the podcast.
Is that a dick? Yeah.
Oh,
come see this movie.
It's like the Batman signal, Snapchat dick pic. With SW dog on it. But yeah, you can't do that. No internet, no, even phone technology is very rudimentary at this point.
Right.
You actually have to it's like, I have to go to the editing room because that's where George is living practically.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, you gotta get out of here. You gotta see this movie.
Get out of this dark room and see the daylight. And
This whole thing. It's like I said, the romanticism is
it's gone. It's gone. Yeah. But I mean,
the whole thing of like going to see a movie together, you actually sit there quietly, watch it, and then like afterwards, like get a piece of pie, talk about it. Like,
sure.
Did you see those wide shots?
But
can you imagine if they did that with robots?
But that was the time, I'm not
saying it's better or worse.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like I'm not placing judgment.
Like the way that movies are viewed now are going to lead to a generation of people making movies that were inspired by the way we view movies now.
Yeah, and that are hopefully different.
Yeah.
Like we're not pining for the old days.
No,
I'm just
no.
saying
This
it's
is
interesting to think of that.
yeah, and I mean, what we're talking about is not just the old days. Like the 70s were considered the golden age of cinema.
Well, American cinema.
American cinema, yeah. You know, this is when, you know, this is the time period is something that probably will never be replicated again in cinema in America. Like this was the big. This was when we had the real artists kind of throwing their visions up on the screen. You know, success be damned. You know, like I don't care. I'm telling my story.
Yeah, like right now we're kind of on this weird place of like a kind of sort of weird new studio system happening. Have you heard this thing about, to go way off topic?
Sure.
But about how Netflix set up House of Cards?
No, I mean I assume that it's very
Algorithm based.
Yeah.
Like
they look at your viewing habits.
Yeah, but like how they actually set up the production, supposedly, it's like involves like, turns out a large quadrant of our viewers like David Fincher.
Yeah.
A large quadrant of our viewers like Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
Like, and it was basically setting up a list of like, these are the top 5 directors, these are the top 5 stars. Can we make a match happen somewhere here?
Sure.
And like that's how it's all going. Like they're doing the same thing with J. Michael Straczynski hooked up with the Wachowski brother. Like it's not like they like got together and like quietly pitched this thing.
Right.
You know?
It's funny. It's all like
kind of very much like the pre.
It's all marketing based.
Yeah, which is kind of what it was before the new generation came in in the 70s. You know, where it's like you got these big powerful companies. You know, people love Doris Day, or you know, like
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this before. I think maybe on last episode. Like it's all cyclical.
Yeah.
You know, like when the studio system breaks down, and you know, and people aren't interested anymore, they're gonna go to, you know, the fringes again. You know, and that's what this time heroin. No, but that's what this time period is. Like the people we're talking about. Like, they aren't a part of the studio system. They became the studio system.
Yeah.
You know? But at this point in time in the history of cinema, this is the fringe. Like, these guys they're kind of the loose cannons.
Totally.
You know, right?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, these are, like, they are the loose cannons.
Yeah. Like, this is a Star Wars podcast, right? Mm-hmm. Lucas, of all of the loose cannons kind of running amok in Hollywood at this time, Lucas is probably the most tame of all of them because he was diagnosed with diabetes. So he can't drink, can't do drugs, can't, you know, live the hedonistic lifestyle because he has a life-threatening disease, you know.
Right.
Like, and he gets sick all the time, and he gets tired.
He's just generally frail.
He's a frail guy.
Yeah.
But you have these other characters, you have a Coppola who's, you know, driving himself insane on every movie he makes.
Yeah. And you can watch Heart of Darkness, and there's definitely drug use happening on that set. Like
you have a Scorsese who's basically making every film with a pile of coke in front of him. Allegedly.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I'd hate to be liable.
Right. Because that's one thing we don't do on SW Dog is libel people.
Yeah, Scorsese's just sitting there with his headphones right now. It's like, oh, I almost had him. Okay.
And then you have Milius, who's like a gun nut.
Yeah, right? And what's funny about Milius, though, is, because I was thinking about this earlier tonight, I was like, we should open the show by like doing a shot or or something. Just because, like, he's such a out there guy, but I think about it, and I was like, I don't really know if he was a big drinker or druggy guy.
Right.
Because he was writing. And he was doing the work.
Right.
You know?
And the other thing about Milius is his political views.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He is a staunch conservative.
Yeah. And now this is, I mean, it's shades of gray.
It's shades of gray.
When you get there, like, it's not like he's a, not saying this is good or bad, but, it's not like he's, like, voting for George Bush, voting for Sarah Palin, like that kind of conservative.
Right.
But he's conservative in terms of, like, he's more libertarian, I would say, than anything.
Right. But so this is the 60s and 70s, the hippies are taking over California, basically. You know, this is all happening in California. The hippies population is huge there, right? I'm working my way into Apocalypse Now. Okay. Apocalypse Now. The inspiration for the title of Apocalypse Now comes from a button, one of the pins that the hippies were wearing at the time, right?
Yes.
Had a peace sign on it that said Nirvana Now.
Yeah.
Right? Milius sees this, right? Yeah. Kind of scratches out Nirvana, turns the peace sign sideways so it looks more like an airplane.
More like a
or
B-52.
A B-52 bomber, right? And writes Apocalypse Now instead of Nirvana Now. Because, like, as we were talking about in the last episode, counterculture, and these guys are a part of the counterculture. Like, Milius is like counterculture. Right?
Yeah.
Like, whatever is going on in the culture, he's completely 180. Like, doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So the hippies, like, fuck that. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I am a gun-toting, like, war is good.
He's a contrarian.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like, this is the kind of character, like, there's a lot of various characters in literature and film and stuff that I've followed based on this kind of attitude. Because it's cool. It's a cool attitude. It's like...
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, everyone else is zigging? Fuck that. I'm zagging.
Exactly.
You know?
Right.
And that's...
But he didn't zag to zag. That was just who he was.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And...
always true to himself before anything else.
Right. And that does, like, as we go through the story, that'll expose a little bit more of, like, why he's also a very unreliable narrator when it comes to the subject of himself.
Yeah.
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 So
a quick note before we get to the big one, Apocalypse Now.
Yes.
I teased it, but he made a movie, directed it before Apocalypse Now. He didn't direct Apocalypse Now, but as we'll later tell you, he had a huge he was very much responsible for that movie.
Yep.
But prior to that, made a movie called Big Wednesday.
1978.
Yeah. Big Wednesday. Everyone's seen that movie, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of directors have.
Yeah, but
A lot
other
of
people?
directors, no.
No.
Much like we talked about last week, though, about how THX 1138 seems to be a movie that, like, all directors respect and see.
Yeah.
Big Wednesday seems to be also. I found a list of directors from Tarantino to Fincher who talked about how great Big Wednesday is.
Big Wednesday is the big surfing epic that the world was just yearning for.
Point Break?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
You could you could actually make an argument that who's the woman who directed Point Break and
so that she went on to do Zero Dark 30.
Zero Dark 30 and the Hurt
Can't
Locker.
think of her. She was married to
James Cameron.
Yep, can't think of her name.
Sexist podcast.
Yeah.
But you could make an argument that she actually has taken up the mantle from Milius.
Possibly.
Because, like, all hers are, like...
What's her next movie? I don't know.
Manly men doing manly things.
With
like
guns?
Every movie she
Yeah,
does
right.
is like that.
Right.
Anyhow.
So Milius goes off to make the big ones, Big Wednesday.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, Big Wednesday.
Because he was a big surfer, hanging out in California. He's always catching the big waves.
Yep, he's from
right?
real California
Which
culture.
I really can't picture, because all the pictures of young Milius is like, he's a big, burly dude.
Big bear.
Like, I can't really picture him on a surfboard.
Yeah, it's funny.
And yet, apparently he was a huge surfer.
I'm actually anxious to see this movie because surf culture is a whole thing. Like, I know it's easy to be like, yeah, surfers,
Sure.
But it's not like skateboarding or anything else. Like, it's a real culture of people that, like, I know nothing about.
Right.
Like,
I mean, this was so big that George Lucas and Spielberg traded points. Points being basically the way Hollywood divvies up percentages of gross, money.
Yeah.
Points. They're actors get points, directors get points, right? They traded points on the Big Wednesday with Milius. Milius got points for Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? For Lucas and Spielberg got points on the Big Wednesday,
Yeah.
right? Big Wednesday flops,
Yes.
right? Close Encounters, Star Wars, not so much, right?
You know, it's a funny thing though, because in the documentary we saw, like, kind of presented it like that.
Yeah.
Like, well, they got the short end of that stick, but this was a time of, like, a lot of generosity on the part of these creators also.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I in this day and age, I don't even understand how this deal went down. Like, did they go to the studio and they're like, hey, lawyers, yeah, we want to trade some points here. You know, I mean, we're talking like millions of dollars, but that's cool, right?
Yeah, it's like this guy's not even working for the studio.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, whatever.
This guy has guns.
Yeah.
You know?
But like, this is an era where, like, these guys were very, like, invested in creativity and each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
where it's like, I kind of feel like it was like whether it was successful, and also, of course, no one was expecting any of them.
Nobody expected anything to work.
And if
Like,
you look
George
at Close
Lucas is like,
Encounters-
Star Wars is not going to be a big hit.
If you look at
Close Encounters is not going to be a
and
big
Star
hit.
Wars, like, probably the most relatable movie is Big Wednesday with, I mean, it's got a young Gary Busey. Young, good-looking Gary Busey.
Was Gary Busey in it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Young
I didn't
Gary
know that.
Busey. And it's
William
got
Catt.
and
And
Jan Michael...
Jan Michael Vincent?
Yes.
Vincent?
Jan Michael Vincent.
I pulled that out of
Jan
my
Michael
ass. I'm
Vincent,
like,
thank
oh,
you.
man.
Airwolf.
Airwolf.
Yes.
Airwolf and The Greatest American Hero.
Is he the greatest American hero?
No, William Catt. William Catt
Oh.
is The Greatest American Hero.
I was like, Jesus Christ, I gotta watch that shitty movie.
Believe
Sure.
it or not, I'm walking on air.
I watched 3 seasons of Airwolf. Never seen that one, though. Never watched
Really?
Greatest American Hero.
Seinfeld?
Never watched it.
Seinfeld does the whole parody on the song from
Family Guy does it. That's all I know. See?
you're missing out on a huge punchline in Seinfeld.
Wow. Someday.
Someday.
But Jan Michael Vincent, it's weird that both Jan Michael Vincent and, not to spoil,
Is
but
Jan Michael Vincent alive?
yeah.
What
He's
happened to that guy?
He's missing a leg.
What?
He had some serious
Diabetes?
problems. I don't know. He got in some accident.
Oh.
Just like Gary Busey.
The guy always creeped me out, actually. Airwolf just didn't do it for me.
He was in a great film. Well, borderline great. But we're talking about like big manly machismo like movies.
Yeah.
He was in a great movie called The Mechanic with
Okay.
who am I thinking of? Death Wish, Charlie Bronson.
Charlie Bronson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where Charlie Bronson is an assassin
Okay.
and he takes on this young protege.
Okay. Kind of
Played by
remember this. Kind of
Jan
remember
Michael
this.
Vincent.
Jan Michael Vincent, I never really thought of as a manly guy.
Yeah.
His name is Jan Michael Vincent.
It's funny because everything that I like that he's done ends up kind of getting also tagged as like homoerotic.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like when you look at like tags of things.
Yeah.
It's like,
Folks, if you don't know who we're talking about, just Google his name.
Yeah.
Look at his pictures. He's kind of got like feathered hair.
I think also a lot of that goes with the fact that he was into a style of bodybuilding that would not become popular for another 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, he was like cut in 1968 or
Sure.
78.
He's like the Van Damme before Van Damme.
Yeah, he is kind of.
Right?
You're right.
Kind of that body type, kind of that style, kind of that look.
But he's got this weird thing about him where he was like poised to be the next Charlie Bronson, Clint Eastwood, what have you. But he never quite popped.
Never popped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jan Michael
Probably
Vincent.
because of what we're talking about, just like that
Yep.
weirdness. He had that kind of just
weirdness.
he wasn't it. He didn't have that complete it.
I say you should Google Big Wednesday, Jan Michael Vincent, and then also Google Jan Michael Vincent 2015. It's
Scary.
seriously, it's bizarre. He's missing a leg. He's all fucked up, man.
Oh,
it's
man.
crazy.
Sad story.
Yeah.
But anyway,
And Gary Busey, they both suffered like weird
Gary
accident
Busey's just
things.
yeah, it's just weird.
I just listened to an interview with him.
So
Lost part of his
Milius
brain.
directed and wrote Big Wednesday. It flops. He goes on to write a little movie called Apocalypse Now.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is where the collaboration and things or switching hands really comes back into play.
Yeah, and I think we should probably try and keep Apocalypse Now kind of brief, because we're going to we
totally have to touch on this again, but this is where Lucas comes back into play, because Lucas was, like, while Lucas is making THX 1138 and then American Graffiti, like, the entire time, Lucas is like, well, I have this sci-fi story that I'm thinking about. Totally talking shit.
Yeah.
You know, right? Like, he didn't really have, like, things set in stone. He's just like, yeah, you know. It's
he had that
like,
list of names.
It's kind of like Flash Gordon.
Ashra on the Boga.
But I kind of want to do this Vietnam movie, too. And Coppola is just like, yeah, you should do this. You should do this movie. You know, about Vietnam. Tell your Vietnam story, right? Yep. And Lucas being Lucas, he goes, you know, he's kind of on the set of The Rain People with Coppola across the country.
Yep.
You know, gets introduced to Milius, or not introduced. He already knew Milius, right? But he's like, Spielberg comes in, is introduced to Milius, and the both of them are like, hey, you should write this movie. You should write a movie about Vietnam. You know, Milius being a gun nut, wanting to be in the service, blah, blah, blah. You know, and Lucas always kind of pushing off the writing duties on other people is like, hey, write this movie.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to write it.
my little art movie.
I don't want to write it.
Yeah.
Right? I can't write.
Write my little movie.
Pain in the ass.
Please.
Right?
Oh.
So he like basically tells Milius to write Apocalypse Now, even though Lucas and Coppola have been talking for years now of like, yeah, this is going to be your movie. You're going to make this movie, right?
See, I had a hard time understanding how the timeline,
because it switches. It goes back and forth so much at this point.
It feels like it's depending on who's telling it too, though.
True.
Because my impression was that Milius was working on the screenplay independently. And it was then brought to Coppola.
Yes, because there's a point where there's a great interview on YouTube where it's almost an hour where Francis Ford Coppola is actually interviewing Milius.
God, we watched the whole thing today. Billable time.
Billable time. Yeah. and he, you know, Francis Ford Coppola ends up making Apocalypse Now, so he knows the story, but he's interviewing Milius like he doesn't know the story, which is great. Like, Francis Ford Coppola is like a great interviewee, you know, like he's just, or a great interviewer, right?
Both.
Like, he's very gracious. He knows how to listen. He knows how to, you know, pick up on details that other people wouldn't pick up on, and you know, he kind of says like. He asks him, he's like, so did George Lucas, like, collaborate with you on, you know, while you were writing Apocalypse Now? And he's like, no, you know, he would kind of look at pages after I wrote them, you know, but he didn't really, like, George Lucas being who he was is just like, go off and do this, and you know, when you bring it back to me, I'll be like, I'll look at it, you know, and be like, yeah, this is good, and this isn't good, you know, but...
These are a lot of words.
But it's such a weird, like, so many things are happening that are, like, in this small period of time that are having huge effects on what really ends up happening.
Yeah. Like,
George Lucas goes off and makes TH-1138. It's kind of bombs. It's a cold movie, as we talked about last episode, right? Mm-hmm. Coppola's like, make something a little bit more friendly. So Lucas makes American Graffiti with his intent to make his Vietnam movie, Apocalypse Now, next, right?
Yep.
Wanting it to be a dark comedy.
Wanting it to also be a cinema verite style documentary type thing.
Well,
black
that's
and
because
white.
Everything Lucas does is cinema verite.
Well,
he wants everything, like, that's his thing.
Well, that's what everyone was into at the time.
Sure.
You know, Cassavetes was
right, but
popping.
Lucas didn't want to deal with actors.
Right.
Right? Everything was like, oh, just
let them do what they do, and I'll follow them.
Yeah. So Lucas makes American Graffiti basically because Francis Ford Coppola dared him to. Just make something that's popular, you know, make something that's friendly, you know. So he makes it and ends up being a huge blockbuster, right? Nobody knew it.
Well, comparatively speaking.
I mean, it was big. It was a big movie for Lucas.
Sure.
Makes him a millionaire, right? And George Milius concurrently is writing this Vietnam movie, right? And Francis Ford Coppola is kind of like to use a Godfather term, the puppet master.
Pull the strings.
Right, he's pulling the strings on both of them. You know, he's like, George Lucas over here. Yeah, you're going to direct this movie. That's going to be your next movie. Right? And Milius is like, he's telling Milius, put everything you ever wanted in a movie into the script. Like everything you ever wanted to do, just throw it into this movie.
Yeah. Well, he's nothing if not a patron saint of creativity. It seems like.
Oh yeah, no. I'm not faulting Francis Ford Coppola for what he did because we got like masterpieces out of this, right?
Yeah.
But like, at the end of the day, like Milius and Francis Ford Coppola is like, George Lucas isn't going to want to make this movie. Like George Lucas doesn't want to like he's now rich and successful. Right?
Now, once again, my reading of it diverges because my reading was that they wanted him to make it, but he was no longer interested. Like he had.
I read it differently. That they're like, he doesn't want to do this because, Milius basically comes out and says, "Look, George Lucas is a frail human being."
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
He has diabetes. He doesn't like
jungle.
He doesn't like the jungle. He doesn't like,
poisonous things, insects.
Yeah, he doesn't like leaving his comfort zone, right? Yeah. So I almost feel, and maybe we'll never know the truth, right?
Course.
But Francis Ford Coppola and Milius are like, yeah, George Lucas, he's not the right director for this, right?
See, the way I saw it was because in the interview we watched, which is from 2010, and which, on a side note, this is one of the many things that illustrated why this was such an important subject for us to cover.
Yeah,
was that the documentary and this show, like, other major directors who have their bona fides, Coppola, Spielberg, Lucas, like these are big guys, going out of their way to who don't usually give interviews. Yeah. Like, going out of their way to talk about somebody because he didn't get his due. He's been kind of somehow left behind, right? And I believe this interview was for maybe a DVD extra or something, it felt like.
I don't know. It's very high production values. It had, German subtitles or something.
Right.
Weird.
And so they're talking, and they're talking about, he says that he gave it to Lucas and was like, we've got Apocalypse Now. It's ready. Let's do it.
Right.
And Lucas was kind of like, well, I'm working on some other.
Well, to kind of frame this a little bit, Lucas goes off and makes American Graffiti. He's working on the script for Star Wars. It's painful for him to write the script because he's not a writer, right?
And we talked about that extensively on a previous episode.
We did.
And it essentially amounts to him getting a hotel or something and just sitting there just spending months just kind of scribbling and shit, right?
Yeah. His writing process is ridiculous. He is the procrastinator.
It's completely inefficient.
But Lucas's whole plan after American Graffiti is to make the Vietnam movie. He has this other movie, science fiction movie, percolating that things are in the works. The studio hasn't really decided on a budget yet. But the next movie I'm going to make is this Vietnam movie, right?
Yeah.
And, the ball was rolling so far on this little science fiction movie, Star Wars, that, at a certain point, he's like, well, I guess I have to make this because
I've got conceptual artists.
Yeah, I've put so much into it. I'm he kind of has to let it.
People don't even know the story of Mace Windu.
Yeah. I kind of have to let the little Vietnam movie go away, right? And and at the same time, Lucas is like, Star Wars is my Vietnam movie. He thought that was his,
his way to
commenting on Vietnam.
Yeah,
in a way it is.
In a way it is, yeah. Boy wants adventure, but that's not.
power converters.
Yeah. I want to go to Tashi Station.
Stop.
Yeah.
Tashi Station is North Vietnam.
So Coppola decides that he'll do it himself, and he, having had this experience on Godfather 1 and 2 that was just so, oh my god, it just almost killed me. He's like,
well, wait. When did Godfather come into play with Apocalypse Now?
Godfather 2 is the film he does right before Apocalypse Now.
Okay.
And so, the way I saw it in the interview, at least, he was talking about, he just needed to kind of release from that. And he ends up doing this movie that ends up taking...
Drives him insane.
Yeah, it ends up taking 200 and some odd days of shooting. You can see the entire story that's in the documentary his wife made, Heart of Darkness, which is probably the greatest making of movie ever.
Sure.
That versus Lost to La Mancha, probably.
Right.
This is better.
Yeah.
It's way
this
better.
Is the big one. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But his idea was, as opposed to going, Lucas wanted to do this really stripped down, black and white, cinema verite, shot in California version of Vietnam. When his idea was, why don't I take it the other way? Why don't I do the biggest, baddest Cleopatra studio picture it could ever do?
Sure.
Yeah. And that's what he does, and it almost kills him.
It does. And I mean, this is no small production,
oh my god,
pre-production. Lucas and Milius really worked on this for 4 years prior to it actually being made.
Mm-hmm.
Back and forth. Again, Lucas maybe directing it, maybe not. This was a huge, in the works for many, many years. And then when Francis Ford Coppola finally does take it over, he does go off into the Philippines and makes it, right? He doesn't go to Vietnam, right?
He goes off to somewhere.
The jungle, and he drives himself crazy.
And it's crazy stuff where he needs all these helicopters doing this stuff, so he's using the government helicopters, but then actually they get called out in the middle of scenes sometimes to go squash minor rebellions.
Yeah.
So, but you can actually see this in the documentary, too. You see him directing, the big famous napalm scene.
Yes.
And these helicopters coming in, and then they all just swoop to the side instead of what you normally see. And he goes, where are my helicopters going?
Yeah.
And it turns out they had to go squash some minor rebellion somewhere. It's insane. And not to mention, you're dealing with the craziest actors at the height of their crazy.
Well, yeah.
And all Easy Rider, we have Dennis Hopper here.
You have Dennis Hopper, but you also have Martin Sheen, who's
has a heart attack.
Sick. Yeah.
He has a heart attack. After 6 days of shooting, he has a heart attack from all the goddamn blow they're doing.
Yeah.
And so they lose him for literally 6 months. He can't shoot. And so they keep trying to shoot around it and stuff. And of course the famous story is the Brando thing. Hires on Brando, who at this point has shifted from Godfather.
Yeah.
Where he's unhireable, whatnot.
Right.
After Godfather 2, he is officially in the Marlon Brando business.
Right.
There's a quote from him. And I'm in the Marlon Brando business, and, business is good. And the story is that, if you want Marlon Brando, that's what he's selling.
Sure.
So he says he'll do it for, it's some unreasonable thing, $1 million a day.
Right.
Something crazy.
Right.
And it's the same deal he gave with the Superman people.
Right.
And Francis Ford Coppola is, who is also the guy responsible for his comeback. Because, keep in mind, he was untouchable at this point. He was not, no one was going to make a movie with Marlon Brando at that point.
Right.
He had to fight to get him in it. And Marlon Brando, he's like, okay, well, I just, you're going to play Kurtz, you're going to play, Kurtz, right?
Kurtz, yeah.
You're going to play Kurtz, you're going to play the big bad, the guy we're all waiting to see. You're supposed to be, this tough military commander guy, so you got to get fit and lean. He's like, yeah, well, I'll do. Shows up fatter than ever at this point. Not as fattest, but the fattest he's been at this point.
Right.
And he's like, oh, okay. Francis Ford Coppola's like, I'll just rewrite it on the fly. I'll rewrite, and this is where we talk about the collaborative thing. Because while a lot of the words that were written did make it to the final version,
right,
the entire end scene is improvised / they were writing on cue cards.
Sure. But this interview between Francis Ford Coppola and John Milius.
Yes.
Francis Ford Coppola gives John Milius basically credit for not only the I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, like the key lines in this movie and that, like, he also gives him credit for like the key scenes in the movie, and the key characters in the movie. You know, it's
Right.
like, you know, you had Mr. Clean and the surfer guy and
We don't forget the Martin Sheen character.
the Martin Sheen character.
Who's this broken character who can't live without war anymore.
Right. And the whole idea of the helicopters, that was Milius. Like,
Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola
One
was like,
more mission.
yeah, Francis
After this,
Ford
I won't need
Coppola is
another
like,
one.
And the, you know, the what's the song, the classic, the Valkyries.
Oh yeah, the
Cry of the Valkyries.
Fly of the Valkyries.
Fly of the Valkyries, right? Like, that was
Flight of the
Milius.
Valkyries? Is that
Flight
right?
of the Valkyries.
Is that right?
I think so.
The Wagner.
Yeah, the Wagner's
Yeah.
piece. Like, that was all in
Da-da-da-da.
Milius's head. He's
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is like what's going to play before, you know, like, they're going to hear the song before the helicopters come in. And that's like,
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I thought it was cool too. They talk about it in the interview, like that wasn't used in military operations before. Like they did do psyops where they used like rock and roll and stuff.
right.
But after that, they always used it.
Right. And the whole idea of using the Doors, you know, like Milius is like, yeah, the Doors. Like, I
Yeah.
always had this in my head that the Doors would be playing. And Francis Ford Coppola is like, yeah, and the Doors ended up becoming synonymous with Vietnam War. And Milius is like, yeah, and I ended up meeting, you know, the guys from the Doors, and they're like, they hated it because they thought their songs were all about peace and love. And
Yeah.
they're like, no, it's about war. All
Yeah.
your songs are about war.
Meanwhile, Coppola went to school with the Doors.
Yeah.
He knew
Yeah,
Ray
yeah,
Manzarek
yeah.
and
Right.
Jim Morrison and all those guys.
I thought this
like everything's tied together at this point, Ron.
Well,
it's
this-
all going together.
was a great insight on Milius at this point.
Mm-hmm.
When he was writing Apocalypse Now, he was like, so World War II, World War One and World War II was, in his mind, a New York war, right?
Right.
There was always a guy from the Bronx.
Yeah, or
you know,
a guy from Chicago, even.
right?
Yeah.
That fought in World War II, right?
Yeah.
There was always a guy there. You know, he had
Yeah.
a thick Bronx accent.
Yeah.
There was never anybody portrayed from California in World War II, right?
Right.
California, all the Californians were in Vietnam, right?
Yeah, this was a California war.
This was a California war. You know, you had the hippie movement contrasting with war. You know?
Yeah.
So you had the guys with the peace sign written on their helmet, and it was such a contrast. You know, you had the surfer dudes in the war.
And there's a period in time when culture is just actually, in American culture, is just really focused on California.
Mm-hmm.
The music's coming from California. The things are happening. The Whiskey Go-Go's in California.
Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah.
So I thought that was a very interesting insight on Milius. Obviously, you know, the clash of all of this made for a classic movie that nearly drove Francis Ford Coppola insane.
Yeah, that scene. I don't know how much you remember the documentary, but there's that scene where it's the 200th day of shooting or something, and they have like a big celebration, this big cake. You've already seen the 100th day of shooting celebration.
Yeah.
And Francis Ford Coppola is just sitting there, like clearly drugged or just having some kind of breakdown, holding Sofia Coppola in his arms, staring at nothing while this giant cake is going on. Everyone's just drugged out. And,
Right.
oh, what a mess.
Yeah. So Lucas goes on to make Star Wars. Francis Ford Coppola, you know, goes through therapy. Spielberg is off making 1941, which is a favorite movie of mine.
Yeah, you have always been a defender of this movie, which I've never seen.
It is a crazy ass World War II picture.
Mm-hmm.
That Milius helped write.
Really?
Yeah, he.
Oh, that makes sense because he's into the war stuff.
Yeah, he's into the war stuff.
Sure.
Right. Before he goes off and makes a movie that I am, as a nerd, as a film geek, ashamed I'm not familiar with. A little movie by the name of Conan the Barbarian.
Conan the Barbarian, Ron. Okay, so Conan the Barbarian is a movie that I liked as a kid quite a bit.
Yeah.
And in college, me and a couple friends, we pretty much bottomed out on booze and drugs and watched this movie for a week straight.
Nice.
On repeat. I've seen this movie a million times. We used to just listen to the soundtrack while driving around on repeat.
Okay.
This is the world's introduction to Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
In a real way.
Yes.
Like, he's been in other movies, Hercules Unchained, some other bit parts. I think he's got a small part in The Long Goodbye of all things.
Really?
But this is the first time you really get to see full-on Arnold / Conan the Barbarian. This is written by Oliver Stone, which is the first time that you really get to, like... When I was a kid, there was, like, groupings of directors.
Yes.
Where it's, like, George Lucas, Francis Coppola, Milius was on the list, but, Spielberg, Lucas, Coppola, and Oliver Stone. But I always knew Oliver Stone was, like, the outlier for some reason.
Yeah, I'm surprised that, like, Oliver Stone enters the scene. I wasn't really familiar with this, but Oliver Stone, I like how he's described. He basically, he wrote the original script during a period where he was on the addiction of cocaine and depressants.
Now, wouldn't that... Now, this is 1982, so he hasn't made Wall Street yet.
Yeah.
He hasn't made...
He hasn't made anything yet, right? He's just our screenwriter.
Pretty much. So he hasn't made Platoon. So that period of cocaine and depressants, would that stretch for about until 2002?
2012?
Yeah, I mean, like, I love Oliver Stone.
I do too.
He's got a lot of stylistic indulgences he goes for that, like, can kind of get annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I always respect him because he swings for the fences every movie he makes.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Oliver Stone wrote the original screenplay for this. Milius comes in, wants to direct it, doesn't know anything about Conan.
Basically, all he knew was the Frazetta paintings. He was a big fan of Frank Frazetta.
Frank Frazetta paintings, sure.
Yeah. We've talked about that on the podcast.
Yeah. Comes in, makes a lot of demands on this movie.
Seems like just a demanding guy.
Yeah, he basically wants to cast all the actors based on their looks, not their acting abilities.
Yeah,
hence Arnold Schwarzenegger, who basically can't speak English.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and this is what is that called? The jaw surgery. He had to grind down his jaw so he didn't have the weird, like, wide jaw thing.
Yeah, right.
But he delivers throughout this whole thing.
Sure, yeah.
And if you listen to the commentary, first off, I highly recommend finding a DVD of this and listening to the commentary. It's John Milius and Arnold Schwarzenegger, circa maybe somewhere at 2007, 2005 maybe, just talking about this movie. And then go listen to the commentaries for T2 and T3, Terminator 2 and 3, or any other Arnold Schwarzenegger commentary. Because Arnold Schwarzenegger always refers to the Terminator as, this is the scene when the Terminator does blank.
Right.
Right. But in Conan, it goes, this is the scene where I get my sword. Like, he clearly identifies with the character. He had the sword hanging in his office. Like, he had it, like, framed and stuff in his office when he was governor of California.
Right.
Like, this is a film near and dear to his heart.
Sure.
And many of our hearts. I mean, anyone who can answer what is the riddle of steel.
Sure.
Anyone who can answer what is good in life.
Well, so Star Wars connections to this.
Yes.
James Earl Jones is the antagonist in this, correct?
That's right, yeah. Darth Vader himself.
Yeah.
And it's so cool how they play him. John Milius talks about wanting to make a character, because he plays Thulsa Doom, who is like, he's the man who kills Conan's family when he's a child.
Okay.
It's like that. And he wants him to be played like a being who is a race that's gone extinct.
Yeah.
So
he's
he's
a black man with blue eyes and straight hair.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Who can turn into a snake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I love the 80s.
Oh, it's so cool. It's such a cool movie. Now, this is also... So, we're in 1982 at this point. Star Wars has come out. Empire's come out. We're still waiting on Jedi, right?
Yeah.
But this is totally a move. This is a Dino De Laurentiis production.
Yes.
And this is totally a move to... I feel like this was, after Star Wars, there was a real interest in, like, Flash Gordon... Because there was a lot of publicity around the idea that this was from serials and pulp and all that stuff. Yeah. And suddenly all these pulp characters started getting a lot more play at this point. And this movie in particular, it's like, hey, we've got George Lucas's friend. We've got a very famous pulp character who is incredibly popular in the comics of all things. There was the Savage Conan magazine, which was strangely popular in prisons. I just found this out.
Got to find your audience somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. But and so there was a lot of care put in this production, and you can see it on the screen. There's all these visual systems put together for like logos for various tribes and things, and like everything's made also not to be like the original screenplay called for it to be very magical. Like have a lot of like kind of hobbity magic shit going on. Sure. And there's magic stuff. There's one scene specifically magic, but the way Milius saw it was like, no, it needs to be more like an alternate past. Like, everything needs to work. Like, you need to be able to reference that, like, that's a cart, that's how that thing is, that's how this works. Okay. Like, the Wheel of Pain is a gigantic grain turn thing. Like,
right. Yeah. Right.
And it really has turned out to make it, like, very sustainable. I mean, how many people still to this day, how many college guys still to this day watch this movie? Sure. And reference, you know, what is good in life?
Well, so to counter that, back in the day when it was released, Time Magazine's review. Yes. This is like Star Wars made by a psychopath.
And I think this is probably the lasting legacy of the film in Hollywood, is that this was the opportunity to be like, oh, okay, well, that played. This old school serial stuff is playing. Yeah. Let's see where else it can go, right? Sure. And Milius convinces them that it needs to be a hard R, because like that's the other thing about this movie. It's an R-rated film.
Oh yeah, it was basically it was. Oh no, I'm getting mixed up with the next movie, but it was very violent. It had to actually be cut from X-rated movie to an R-rated movie.
Yeah, this is not a what you call 4-quadrant film.
Yeah, no, right, and which is probably why I never actually watched it as a kid.
Oh, it's a great film. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to be had in here. The next film, Conan the Destroyer, is actually PG-13. Okay, they learned their lesson. Right, but it's a success financially, but it's not Star Wars. Right, you know. Right. And it's one of those things where I think the lesson for the next 15, 20 years is people are going to look at this and say, yeah, it could have been maybe if we would have done it a little different. Sure. If we would have had someone a little more reasonable. If we would have had a little less, all the vision, but not all the aggression. Right. Unfortunately, with John Milius, it comes hand in hand.
Right, and that's the thing that's kind of...
That's why it's a classic.
The undercurrent that's happening with all these movies is like, people are like, well, the guy can deliver, so we'll put up with the crazy. Yeah. But at a certain point, the crazy is kind of overpowering what people deal with, what they'll put up with.
And this is probably the fulcrum right here.
This is kind of the fulcrum, right? Yeah, this is kind of the point where well, he's crazy, he wants guns,
we've given him a shit ton of money to make this movie.
He's usually, The budgets are getting bigger, and...
the pressure's getting bigger.
The amount of shit that we're willing to put up with it's getting a little bit too much.
And now in the short game, what I think a lot of people were probably seeing was that we projected this movie to make X, and it made about half of that. We still cleared, we still feel good. Sure. But
it didn't.
If there would have been a few concessions, right. Like did we
As you said, it's no Star Wars.
Did we need that scene with that orgy thing? Do we need that scene with the witch in the hut? Right. You know, like, if we would have cut those, could we have made 20 more million? Right. You know? But what they're not seeing necessarily at this point is the long game, because how could you? Because also gives us Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's going to become such a bankable star in the next 20 years. It's insane.
Right, and I mean, Schwarzenegger, like interviews I saw, it's like he knew this too. He's like, okay, this is my in of becoming. I can now parlay this from
If there's
being
ever been
just
a man who
bodybuilder to being an actual like action movie star,
which
like,
is a freak sport at this time. Let's all remember that.
Oh, totally.
Like,
and he's kind of he's an anomaly at this point too. I mean, nobody was doing what he was doing.
If you can criticize him for anything you want, his acting or whatever, but the one thing you can't criticize him on is that man can identify an opportunity.
Totally. There's a minor blip on the road before we move into Milius' next large achievement. I just wanted to throw this out. The movie came out in 1983 called Lone Wolf McCade.
No, I don't know Lone Wolf McCade. What do you know about that?
The Texas Ranger.
Oh,
what's his name? Chuck Norris.
Oh, yes,
Right?
Walker. Yeah,
Yes, Walker.
Got it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw this in our notes because I don't know much about this movie, but on Internet Movie Database as well as Wikipedia, Milius is credited as spiritual advisor, and I was just like, how much does that pay?
Yeah, that's very interesting also because it's like, okay, so by this point, 83, Bruce Lee's dead, right?
I believe so, yes.
I believe Bruce Lee's dead.
Yeah.
Chuck Norris famously learned Jeet Kune Do from
Yes.
Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
Now, in an interview I saw today, Milius talks about hanging out with Steve McQueen with Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
Because he was going to, there was a whole summer where the three of them hung out a bunch because Steve McQueen wanted to man them up.
Right.
And Steve McQueen was really into jiu-jitsu.
Right.
And it's like, this is like the weird path that Milius is traveling. Like, hanging out with...
There's a weird storyline where, like somebody is taking, like, Spielberg to, like, biker bars.
Yeah,
because he's
Steve
like,
McQueen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, this is so, like...
Yeah, he's taking him out to
time.
biker bar. Yeah, and, like, because Steve McQueen at this point is going through some midlife crisis.
Right.
Where he's doing jiu-jitsu.
But also at this point, like, we're seeing pictures of Milius, like, in the camo vests with, like, the rifles. Like, he's become a part of the NRA. You know, he's on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Like his kind of lifestyle is taken over.
Well, he's becoming this character.
Yeah.
And that's what, in the documentary especially, they really hammer on, is that at a certain point, this becomes like a marketing. At this point, he's been in the industry for 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of, like you said earlier, a lot of the reasons he's getting hired is because he's this gregarious big character.
Right.
And so it starts to become advantageous to be that character more.
Yeah, because they make a point in the documentary of being like, where a lot of his peers at the time were kind of going for, and this is relatively speaking, but they were kind of going for the cash grabs. They were going for, like, the easy money deals.
Well, they were literally building a sustainable blockbuster system.
Yeah.
I mean,
where
like,
Milius was not doing that. He was
No.
going against that grain constantly.
Yeah.
You know, and being antagonistic all the way.
And I mean, it's not cynical for us to say that. Like, that's actually what they were doing.
Yeah.
Like, Spielberg was making Amblin.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and later DreamWorks.
Right. Lucasfilm was established.
Lucasfilm was like, yeah.
ILM was established.
We're making little toys. We're building things. We're making... You know, Spielberg's got a whole host of little directors underneath him executing his vision to one degree or another.
Right.
Yeah.
So...
Which is like a strange perversion of the Coppola-Zoetrope thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll have to do
a
multi-episode someday.
We'll have to touch on those directors. So, 1984 rolls around.
And here it is, the year of my birth.
The actual film that I'm probably most familiar with of all of Milius' work.
Nice.
Red Dawn.
Yes.
Red Dawn.
Starring Chris Hemsworth.
Was it, really?
That's the follow-up. That's the remake.
Oh, the remake.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
No, it was Patrick Swayze.
Yeah,
And
it's
C.
very
Thomas
much
Howell.
Patrick Swayze. Yeah.
Red Dawn is basically the America is invaded by the Ruskies.
Yep, this Cold War all the
Cold
way,
War,
baby.
yeah. The whole premise of this movie is just like, I don't know, flawed, ridiculous. I don't know, like
Awesome. It's like the Goonies for
yeah,
paramilitary gun nuts.
It's like Russia has invaded America, and the only way to fight them is this high school group.
Well,
Group of high schoolers are going to become the Wolverines.
Well, here's a weird thing.
Become
Rob.
like militant Minutemen. I mean,
what's so different between this and the Hunger Games?
the time period.
Exactly. And so that's the thing is, what's weird about it is, it seemed like the documentary, like the Milius doc on Netflix.
Yes.
You should watch it.
Yes.
Is presents this as something that was very offensive to Hollywood. But
Yes.
now granted, right now we are 30 years out from that.
Right.
But looking at it now, it's like, well, it looks like it did okay in the box office, made decent money.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's well remembered. Until the documentary, I had never actually heard anyone say a single bad word about this movie.
Right.
Like, I'd always enjoyed it. I've always heard people talk about it being fun. It's like, everyone's talked about it being kind of goofy. In the way the Goonies is goofy.
Right. Well, okay, so basically this movie comes out.
Yeah.
Right? Very violent.
Yeah, it is violent. Yeah.
Right? At this point, it basically makes the Guinness Book of World Records as the most violent film. It has, 134 acts of violence, per hour, basically, so it's an act of violence every 2 minutes, the DVD comes out later and it has a carnage counter on it. Like, it's a violent film. I remember seeing it as a kid, going to the movies to see it. I didn't really think much of it other than the premise was cool. It's like, oh, fight the Russians, on American turf, and it's high schoolers doing it, right?
Yeah.
And it's very guerrilla warfare and blah, 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 right? But, as you said, the documentary that we watched on Milius kind of paints this as the downfall of Milius, right?
Yeah.
So, two things we kind of glossed over. One, Milius, because of who he is and what he's done in the past, as we kind of started out this episode, he's not the big name that he's not a Spielberg, he's not a Lucas, he's not the well-known brand that those directors have come, Scorsese, Coppola, right?
He's not a name that goes above
Right?
a title.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Even though he's done these great movies, continues to work on stuff. There's I don't want to blame the documentary on this completely, but there is a talk about how he's been blacklisted.
Yeah, well,
because of this movie,
he's been very vocal about this,
right?
Also,
because
you
of
can
this
find
movie,
YouTube
right?
Interviews with him
Because he's a conservative, and he's making movies in liberal Hollywood. He's blaming liberal Hollywood for blacklisting him because of this movie, right?
Yeah.
Now, prior to this, we've talked about it. He's a gun nut. He's very boisterous. There's been incidents where he's brought guns to studio meetings, and studio heads have offered up their notes on a film, and he's pulled out a gun. Whether it's actually pointing at a studio head or just put out on the table, as we alluded to at the beginning of this episode.
Right.
Right? A gun on the table at a business meeting is not really good for business.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's take a step back from the whole story and the mythology of Milius.
Yeah.
Pull a gun on a table. I'm never gonna fucking talk to you again.
Right.
Like,
right?
period.
Right.
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 Yeah.
But the documentary and other people, Milius himself, want to say is like No, that my behavior had nothing to do with this. It was the movie Red Dawn. Red Dawn. It was too political. It was too, right wing when everyone else is left wing.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
And that's why he didn't do much after that. Like his career really kind of hit a wall after Red Dawn.
Well, here's my argument, Ron. So he does Big Wednesday, right?
Yes.
And it kind of flops.
Yes.
And then that's 1978.
Yes.
So it takes another 4 years from do Conan the Barbarian, 1982.
Right.
And that does okay. 2 years later, he's Red Dawn. He's got a good clip right now.
Yep.
And then Red Dawn comes out. He does an episode of The Twilight Zone, which a lot of big directors did in that 85 era.
Yep. Did an episode of Miami Vice.
Okay. That must have been as a writer.
Yes, he was a writer on Miami Vice.
So he does a little bit of writing stuff. And then he doesn't do another movie until 89 with Farewell to the King.
Right. Right.
Well, now, what do you know about Farewell to the King?
Not much. It didn't do a lot.
Now, Farewell to the King has Nick Nolte in the starring role. So, and this is Nick Nolte in 89, which I feel like is still fairly bankable, right?
Sure.
The fact that neither of us know anything about it kind of probably speaks to how that worked.
Sure. Well,
I feel like, especially in this period, when there's a lot of fertile directors working, if you have a flop, well, that's 4 years.
Right.
Right. And so he has a flop 4 years later, gets another big movie with a big star in it. It flops. And then he doesn't do anything else for another 2 years? Is that right? 3 years. 1991, Flight of the Intruder.
Okay.
Now, do you know Flight of the Intruder?
I've heard of it.
I have never seen Flight of the Intruder, but it's got Willem Dafoe, Danny Glover.
Yep. I may have seen it.
Yeah. And Brad Johnson, who I recognize, but I don't recognize the name. Weirdly.
Okay.
Rosanna Arquette also in this film.
Interesting.
And Tom Sizemore.
Huh.
So,
well, okay, so a couple things going on here, right? Like, his career kind of went a little south because of some not so stellar hits, Conan being one of those, right? Arguably, but it wasn't a moneymaker.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, it was
right?
it was a moneymaker, but it wasn't necessarily as big as it could have been.
Right. Another thing, kind of
also.
going on behind the scenes, is he had an accountant who was a good friend of his. Mm-hmm. Right. Ends up stealing a lot of money from him.
Now that happens in the 90s, though, right?
Does it?
That's what I inferred. I'm not sure if that's true.
Like, as much as the documentary about Milius is very good, and we gleaned a lot of information from it, like,
it's not.
It is. We are in a gray area with his career. Obviously, he did not continue on to make the huge blockbusters that George Lucas and Spielberg and Scorsese and even Coppola did.
Here's the simplified way for me to look at it.
Yeah.
Earlier we said people were willing to put up with the crazy because it delivered.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, and this might be betrayal, and it might be premature. There's my hypothesis, based on what I know.
Yeah.
Is that people ceased to put up with the crazy because it no longer delivered.
Well, they said that in the documentary. Is like we don't want to put up with the crazy anymore because it's not delivering. It's like, well, how much crazy do you want to put up with, and still not get a movie? Like,
right.
We'll get a script, but we still don't have a movie.
Yeah.
We're dealing with all this crazy, and it's like, well.
Well, I'm not even saying that. I'm saying that he wasn't bringing in the hits.
Right.
Right. It's like, well, we do Conan the Barbarian, it does okay. Do Red Dawn, it's okay.
Sure.
And then, but it brings a lot of controversy and a lot of bullshit on our heads.
Right.
Unnecessarily, maybe.
Right.
And, and then give another shot, and it's nothing.
Right.
And another shot.
Right.
It goes nowhere.
Yeah, so, it's an unfortunate situation. The guy was talented. The guy has brought a lot to cinema.
Yep.
Um,
It's an issue that all uncompromising individuals face at some point.
yeah,
Because it's
Yeah.
one thing about Spielberg in particular is that like he's very powerful, but he's also very affable.
yes,
Like
Yeah.
and like that's how he, especially early on, like he in meetings and stuff, he's not a, not a dick.
right,
He
right,
works with people on things.
right.
Like there's that story about with the Gremlins. Who's the director on that? I'm zonking out here on this one.
Not Chris Columbus.
Nope, not Christopher Columbus, but
Robert Zemeckis.
nope. But the guy who directs that wants to have that that weird scene where Phoebe Cates talks about her dad.
Oh yeah, and the Christmas was ruined.
Dying,
and,
because they found him dead
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
in the chimney and stuff.
Yeah.
Studio wanted to cut that out. Spielberg fought for it, but he asked him first, like, "Do we really need this? Do I need to do this?"
Right.
As
Right.
opposed to a knee-jerk reaction where he goes in there with a gun and sits it down the thing.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, like Milius is like the opposite of all these guys. Right? Like,
Yeah.
He's the opposite. Like he wouldn't compromise. He
The
wouldn't.
things that makes Milius great are the same things that make Milius impossible to ever become that top-tier director.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a couple unfortunate things happened later in his life. As I said, his accountant stole a lot of money from him. Ends up kind of hard on his luck as far as money.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to kind of the little bit more of the bad boys at the time. He goes to David Milch, creator of Deadwood.
Yeah.
Wants to work on Deadwood, which seems like an ideal situation. Like, yeah, get Milius to work on Deadwood, that'd be awesome.
Totally.
And the thing is, David Milch is like, you're fucking John Milch. You can't work on my show. Like, you're too good for this, right?
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah, and he's like, but Milius is like, look, I need to pay for my kids' college,
Yeah.
right?
I had lost all
David,
my money.
And David, yeah, I don't have any money. And David Milch is like, I'll pay for your kid to go to college, right?
Awesome.
Right? And Milius is like, okay, but I'll pay you back. And he did. He ended up paying him back. Like,
Awesome.
it's crazy. Like, nobody does that in Hollywood, but he did because it's Milius, and that's who he is, right? But the thing, watching the documentary, and you had watched the documentary long before I did,
Yeah.
so you knew this, but kind of pulled the rug out from under me. Watching this documentary, you kind of have the talking heads throughout it. You have Lucas talking about him. You have Spielberg talking about him.
Feels like I'm getting poised for a new thing happening.
You have Milius talking about himself, right?
Yeah.
Not really giving, years of when these people are talking, right? Milius ends up having a terrible stroke,
Yeah.
right? Terrible, terrible stroke. Something he's probably never recovered from because he's kind of lost his speech.
Right.
So he
He's
has
theoretically
the
all
words in his
there.
head,
Yeah.
but he can't get them out.
The motor skills.
Yeah, he
have been
can't get them
robbed.
out. He
Yeah.
can still write. He can still, but he's having a hard time communicating.
And this is footage from like 3 years ago.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
he can formulate sentences and stuff, but he's not the wreck. Like
it's a hard.
Spielberg
road.
speaks about it in a very
And
dramatic.
Spielberg is almost in tears.
It's very heart wrenching the
Yeah,
way he talks about
yeah.
it.
And I did not expect that watching this documentary.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't spoil that for you.
No, you
Yeah.
did not. And
Sorry,
it was
listeners.
it kind of it really adds to the story of Milius. It's like, well, you've been this character all your life, and tough luck. Now here's all the the bad breaks you're getting.
Well, and I also kind of saw it the other way too, of like it teases the viewer with like, here's this guy who's been in your life your whole life and has shaped a lot of things that you think about movies without you knowing it.
Yeah.
And you didn't appreciate him then, you didn't speak out for him then, and now he can't make new movies.
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
maybe you should have paid more attention.
he continues to work. He continues to have a dream project to work on Genghis Khan
With RZA from Wu-Tang Clan.
Really?
Yeah.
But he's still writing. He eventually wants it to get it made. This is, we're talking as late as 2013. He's still working on this.
And we don't know. There's a lot of stuff IMDb doesn't show.
Yeah.
Like if you're a script doctor, I don't know if you necessarily always get credit for that sort of stuff.
Right.
Like when you're just punching up scripts. And I think that I don't know if post-stroke, but I think there was a long period where he was probably still getting work as a script doctor.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Just off the books.
Sure.
So,
yeah, it's...
Oh, and he also did a bunch of Rome episodes.
He did do a lot of Rome episodes.
I've never watched
HBO.
Rome.
It's very Milius. Very manly men doing manly things.
I might watch it. I'm going to make Okay, continue on.
I was just going to kind of try to wrap it up here and just be like, he's done a lot of things. He's added a lot to the zeitgeist. Unlike George Lucas, he's not retired. The stroke may have slowed him down, but he still continues to want to work. He still has ideas in his head that he wants to get out.
In the interviews I've seen, he seemed very bitter about the fact that he has that thing about uncompromising individuals have, where he blames someone.
Yeah.
He blames, in his words, liberal Hollywood.
Sure.
That they've blacklisted him. As blacklisted as the, people in the commie hearings and stuff.
Yes.
But, we just talked about it. We don't feel like that's probably true. I feel like there's a lot. And Arnold Schwarzenegger in the documentary even says that that's not true. If you make money, you work. Yeah,
Arnold actually comes off as kind of the voice of reason in this, and he's like, "Look, I never had a problem. People don't look at my political views.
Yeah,
I make money.
Yeah,
I make money for people.
Yeah, and so he kind of falls into that trap of like just blaming people. But he says, he's like, I should have made 20 some odd more movies.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, that's true, but I don't know if there's people to blame for that exactly.
Right.
You know what I mean?
At the end of the day, he can kind of only blame himself.
Kinda.
Unfortunately, I wanted to watch the documentary and be like, oh, this ended up being a good story. But, it kind of ends up kind of being a little bit of a sour note, A
little bit of a cautionary tale. A little bit of a bit of edification, because this guy definitely gave a lot to these guys who were very quiet, meek guys.
Right.
Spielberg and Lucas and stuff whether they were meek, Spielberg, I don't think I'd say was meek.
No,
but
right.
He was,
but he was not.
He was definitely a nerdy little guy.
Yeah, he wasn't rocking the boat as much as Milius was.
And he gave something that was very meaningful to all these guys. He gave this big personality, this big thing.
Yeah.
And it clearly meant a lot to him, and it's hard to tell how much that influenced him, but it seems to have been a lot.
It seems to be a lot. Yeah. It seems to be he's a worthwhile character for us to talk about on the show.
Certainly. I'm actually on the show going to make a little vow. I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm going to put a timeline on it, but I'm going to get through his whole filmography.
Nice.
I've watched a lot of his work, and I'll take it the whole way. I'll watch all the Rome. I'll watch all the movies.
Sure.
I'll update throughout.
For the prequel haters out there, I will say this.
Yeah.
He does not seem to be a fan of Star Wars. He doesn't really seem to be a fan of what Lucas's work had become.
Yep.
He thinks it got a little pompous, and whether you agree with that or not, he's a good source to judge it. Growing up, this is a peer of his. Obviously, the types of movies that Milius was making were a little bit more pulpy. Lucas had a different vision moving forward with the Star Wars movies, whether for good or better or worse, But Milius, there seems to be a little bit of animosity if you read between what Milius is saying in past interviews about Lucas. He doesn't seem to be as fond of where George went with his career.
That seems to be a place where him and Coppola are united. Both of them have quotes being basically like that Lucas traded in the great art he could have made for money.
Yeah.
Like, they both kind of, in different ways, say that same thing.
Yeah, and I would say...
As a Star Wars fan, it's like, well, look at you had a stroke.
I would say, and it's an interesting way to kind of wrap up our talk on Milius. It's like, well, you didn't have the success that George Lucas had. Yeah. You kind of stuck to your vision. Maybe Lucas didn't. Lucas had a little bit more success by giving in to, popularity, maybe. I don't know.
No, it's interesting, though, because, I feel like Lucas didn't necessarily do what Spielberg did. He didn't play the game, right?
Lucas did not play the game, no.
He went and made his own game.
He had his own, yeah.
But he still had masters to serve who told him that he raped their childhood.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing, too, 'cause you look at this, and you look at these guys, these kids practically, they're in their 20s.
Yeah.
Who are, hey, I'm going to make Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Yeah, I'm going to make Star Wars. I remember a surfing movie. It's like, let's all trade points. See whoever wins gets a little bit of payday, and we all get a little bit of payday. Meanwhile, Spielberg goes off, makes Amblin and DreamWorks, and Lucas makes Lucasfilm. Both of them raking in millions of dollars. Who's funding the Milius picture?
Sure.
It's like
sure.
They're still so business minded in that way where it's like,
yeah,
it's
a business. It's a game that all of these players have played differently.
Yeah.
I would say, if you'll allow me to kind of wrap up our show for tonight.
Oh, sure.
I would say, I think Milius is a good start for us to talk about these other players, these other peers of George Lucas, comparing them to how they played the game to the way George Lucas played his game. Obviously George Lucas gets a lot of criticism for the prequels,
right?
But at the end of the day, George Lucas has $4 billion in his pocket. Milius doesn't. George Spielberg doesn't. I don't know how much Spielberg has in his pocket, but Disney isn't buying his movies yet.
Which, I'm sorry, I know you're trying to wrap up, but we forgot to mention Kathleen Kennedy has started her career as the head of Lucasfilm now as George Milius' assistant.
That's right. Yeah, another tie-in to the Star Wars Empire.
Yes.
So I think as we move forward, not right away, but in future episodes of Delusions of Granular, we'll touch on some of these other auteur directors, peers of George Lucas, tangentially connected to the Star Wars universe. But I think if you're a fan of the Star Wars movies, you'll probably be a fan of these other movies, these other directors that these directors have created. These other, I don't know many people who aren't fans of Star Wars as well as Conan the Barbarian.
Yep.
Apocalypse Now obviously is a huge monumental film.
Well, I think it could be an easy argument to make that to be a fan of Star Wars is to be a fan of film.
That's right.
So,
right. To be a fan of film is to be a fan of the people that make film. Hence, John Milius.
To be a fan of these things is to be a fan of guns and
and gold and women.
Yes. So,
all right, folks. I think we've covered John Milius's career.
Yep, and hopefully we'll be able to have an update on that someday.
That's right. Yeah, he continues on. So until next week, JP, do you have anything else?
No, I think I'm good, Ron.
All right.
We will take this gun and put it back in my pocket.
Put the gun away.
I'll go home.
JP's been holding me at gunpoint the entire episode.
It's true.
So if I've been nervous or stumbling on words, it's not because I'm drunk or just stupid. It's because I've been threatened.
Right.
Thanks, JP.
No problem.
All right, folks. We are Delusions of Granular, where we
Talk about Star
Wars,
Wars.
and sometimes
Talk about it.
sometimes we don't.
We don't.